You would take a picture on the Monday and think it was the Sistine Chapel. And then on Tuesday, it didn't look as good as you remembered it. And on Wednesday, you threw it out. I tried to really study fashion, rather than just rely on a pretty girl in a beautiful dress. I was shocked how bad the work was, and I had really wanted him to succeed. Dozens and dozens of Vogue covers, dozens of Rolling Stone covers, Lavazza calendars, Pirelli calendars. I think you need something inside you. There's a driving force there to create. The equipment's a little bit of a trap for some photographers. There has to be a love of humanity. I remember Joaquin Phoenix coming to the studio and he was totally nervous about being photographed. It's not just whether you love photography, but your ability to handle people and situations. I did a royal wedding in Buckingham Palace. 61 people, and you're handling the Queen Mother, you're handling princesses, Prince Charles. Could you just look this way, please? Like that. And he was quite shocked that I said Prince Charles, because normally you say, sir, could you please? But the preparation should be 98% creative.
All right. So today we have one of my biggest inspirations throughout my career. And we have Mr. Albert Watson here. Thank you very much, sir, for coming on the show.
Happy to be here.
That's fantastic. I just want to start off by saying, if you're anything like me, you don't like a ton of, people gloating over your work and stuff like that. But I just want to let you know how much you've personally inspired me throughout my career. I've, had a lot of success in my industry, in the wedding industry. I'm a wedding photographer, and
not easy.
It's very difficult. It's not easy, but also too, I really have always been drawn to your work because I feel like good art, no matter what it is, whether you're an athlete, a photographer, a painter, whatever, cook, anything, the reason why it's good is it conveys and communicates a very specific form of energy. And I always felt like your art really conveyed a sense of power and intensity, and it made your subjects just look so powerful. And, it's not even just the subjects. It's really every element in the photo has really communicated power and intensity to me. And it's resonated in my photography. What I've brought into weddings, I've really always been interested in making my subjects look like that. So I'm interested to kind of kick off the conversation by talking about how much do you think that intensity that comes through in your photos, how much of that was deliberate, and how much do you think was kind of just maybe channeled through you and came out naturally?
I think the main thing for me, just to start a little bit before your question, the main thing for me is that once I got a camera in my hand, and that would be the first time was about 1964 when I was at the first art college that I went to, which was part of the University of St. Andrews at that time. Now it's University of Dundee. But the minute I got a camera in my hand, I became, as I am today, pretty obsessed by it. And you just know, I just knew that I found something. So I was very lucky to find it. And I think to hopefully have a career in something, there has to be something inside you that you feel obsessive about, that you feel so comfortable about it. And unfortunately, sometimes I think with photography that there are sometimes people that get into photography and they become obsessed with the equipment. And that can be a problem because they're obsessed by the equipment in the same way like my father was up at 7 o'clock on a Sunday working on his car. He was obsessed by his car, And I think that photography, and it's usually men, women are not, don't seem to have a problem with that, but the men, they love equipment. So I was never that obsessed by the equipment. I just loved the process. And I remember the first time going into a dark room and you put a piece of white paper in a liquid and an image comes up. I mean, if you demonstrated that in the middle of the 15th century, they would burn you for that. So at that point, I became really obsessed by not equipment or the fact that the camera was nice and so on. I mean, in the beginning, I quite liked the cameras, but it was the process of creating images. So that's what pulled me into it, was the fact that I could take an image. And the first thing I ever did, that I got a camera for a weekend from the college, I came across the Salvation Army band that was on a Sunday going from, and it was a fairly poor district, and they would basically sing hymns, and they had a brass band. And of course, they were in a Salvation Army, they were in a black uniform. And I had this camera and I had black and white film. And I just loved photographing these guys singing and with the brass bands, all the instruments, the tubas and the trumpets and so on. There was about 12 of them and a couple of women singing. And it was, for me personally, it was very successful. And the minute I saw the pictures, that was a key factor. That I thought, oh, that was good. I enjoyed that. But then when I began doing prints of the picture, I realized that I enjoyed it. So back to your original question regarding the way images, that I create images and see images, that because I was trained as a graphic designer, that's at the root of everything. So I had 4 years training in art and specializing in graphic design. Then I went down to London and I went to the Royal College of Art in London, which is a postgraduate only. And I did 3 years there at what was at that time the Royal College of Art Film School. And a lot of interesting people had gone there. Ridley Scott was there, and Tony Scott, his brother, was there. Tony Scott was in my class, and Tony Scott shot my final year film.
Oh, wow.
And for the shooting of the film, which I directed, because I was directing a lot of the cinematography, he got the silver medal, which was a very high honor, And so I had 3 years and I came out as a director. So I came out by doing photography all the time, whenever I could, and whenever I could make a little tiny bit of extra money, like photographing shop windows at night and things like that for a company, that I came out with a heavy art training, heavy creative training, graphic design, graphics are written all over what I do. And then I came as a director, about which a lot of it was handling people. So by the time I got the 7 years, I'd had a pretty solid creative training to be able to handle situations. The problem that I was hit with then, that I didn't have a lot of technique. I just had kind of a common sense technique. And then I realized early on, and I've said this several times, that you would take a picture on the Monday and think it was the Sistine Chapel. And then on Tuesday, it didn't look as good as you remembered it. And on Wednesday, you threw it out. So a lot of the problem was the technique. In other words, the technique had to be learned. It was painful for me, different lighting techniques. And I felt I was old-fashioned. I felt, if you're a plumber, you should be able to fix a faucet. So I felt I should be able to work in daylight. I should be able to work in a studio. I should be able to do a still life. And when I first started in LA, because my wife got a teaching job in LA and I went with her with the family, and I began working in LA. And to make money, I had to basically do whatever I could to make some money. And I did jobs like hospital appliance catalogs, not easy on an 8x10 camera, photographing a chrome bedpan, which I did. So, and there was a lot of complicated things. Back then, you would shoot a catalog and you'd use 8x10 or 2 1/4 cameras, and sometimes even 35. but you would shoot to size. So therefore, if a ring in a jewelry catalog was 1 inch high in the catalog, it had to be 1 inch high on the film,
Wow.
you know?
Wow.
So you basically, and then for certain things that were bigger, let's say the catalog was 8 by 10, 10 inches high, for things that were bigger than that, they had the ability to reduce them, but they expected the vast majority to be shot to size, you know? So a lot of this was just agony, you know, painful. And I didn't enjoy it. I did as much as I could in the evening. I tested as much as I could, and I worked on lighting the best I could. And basically over time, just like it's the same thing as driving a car. When you first try and drive a car, it's very tough. By the end of a week, it's a little tiny bit better. By the end of 3 months, you get a bit of confidence going and you feel quite good in traffic. And then within 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you get in your car and you drive, you don't even think about it because you're automatic. Now, I think in photography, I'm never on automatic because you have to be pretty careful. You know, you have to be kind of, you know, I'm always anticipating, which I learned early on, that something could go wrong. You know, there could be something happening here that could go wrong. And that's almost like, even when things are going well, I'm always thinking something could go wrong here, you know? So I try and check everything. And over the years, you just simply become, I think, more disciplined and more professional. So to answer that question, if you look at the work, it's really driven by graphics. I became very successful in the 70s by doing a lot of handheld motor drive Nikon work, you know, models running towards camera and things like that, stopping, you know, models eating a hot dog or having an ice cream or something, you know, getting in and out of a car with luggage, or, you know, I did a lot of things like that, handheld, and it was very successful. But then once I got into the 80s, and I thought, you know, at some point in my life, I'll do a book. And I began to look at all the body of work and realize that while stuff looked very good in a fashion magazine, it wasn't really looking that great in a coffee table book. And so I then, bit by bit, went back to the roots of more graphics, heavier. You know, at one point, an editor said to me at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, said, a very good fashion editor said, just be careful with your work right now. It's getting a little bit on the strong side. And, you know, you kind of think, well, maybe, how can that be wrong? Strong pictures. But fashion business is a different animal. You know, you can do an iconic shot of Steve Jobs or Alfred Hitchcock or director or whatever. And you apply the same iconicness to, say, a fashion shot. Sometimes the fashion shot takes on too much of an iconic look. And it might just be nicer. The way that things are today, in fact, have ended up being the way it is, where basically they shoot the fashion and that's it. So the era of heavy photographers, for the moment, is slowly evaporating. So there very rarely are you seeing around now in the fashion business anyway, heavy photographers. You know, what you see is fashion photographers. If you look at the work of like Avedon and Penn and Guy Bourdin, Helmut Newton, they were photographers working in the fashion business. So they were photographers who took fashion pictures. And then now things are really dominated by fashion photographers. That's what they do. They photograph fashion. Whereas in the past, there was always this idea that you were trying to create art. So if you go back in time, Horst, even Cecil Beaton, who I don't particularly love, but I mean, Cecil Beaton, photographers like that, a lot of them were fashion photographers. You know, they like fashion. I mean, I think one thing that would be important for a fashion photographer is to realize, you know, that to be a fashion photographer, you should know a little bit about fashion. You should know, there should be, you know, is brushed cotton and linen, how can you, what is it? Is it cotton, linen, cotton? Is it silk? Is it brushed silk? I mean, you have to understand how clothes hang and how move and so on. So I did a lot of work on that. I was actually a kind of professional about that. I tried to really study fashion, rather than just rely on a pretty girl in a beautiful dress.
That is such an important point, Albert. I talk about this a lot on my channel. Well, first of all, there's two things that you mentioned that were really really stuck out to me. First of all, is talking about the technical side of it in the gear. This channel is really focused on technique, lighting, the theory of creativity, the underlying structures of actually, what make you good as a photographer. And I do very little gear related stuff. And I always harp on how little that actually plays a part in your mature portfolio, as you move through the process of becoming a photographer. And, obviously it is very important at first to be able to learn your gear, but only to the point where the gear becomes not a thought. It's out of the way. And you know how to manipulate the light and, get the image quickly and in focus, or however you're trying to do it quickly. But the gear should be it should be an afterthought, honestly. And I do think that too many photographers that think that the quality or the type of gear that they have is going to be the determining factor of what they can ultimately produce. And, it's so good to hear somebody of your caliber actually touch on that, because I talk about that a lot.
The car analogy is really a good one, because people are obsessed by cars. I said my father was obsessed by his car, and I know a lot of people that are obsessed. My son loves cars, I was never that interested in cars, but I did like the function that it could take me from A to B to C to D.
You like to drive fast.
And you don't want it to break down, so you need to know a little bit, but basically it's where you take the car that's important, not what the hell, as long as it's working. And of course equipment's important. That's a given. That's not even a discussion. But it's now with the equipment, and that's the thing that's interesting. The equipment now, I'm astounded by the modern cameras, and I realize that we have hundreds of filing cabinets here full of negatives that were essentially created by two things: an aperture and an f-stop. That was it. The only change from that is whether or not it's a 150 millimeter lens or a 50 millimeter lens. So apart from that, and the 50 millimeter lens or the 150 or the 250 has the same thing on it. It has apertures and shutters. End of story. Nothing else. Nothing. I was speaking to one of the engineers at Leica, and I said, how do you like the camera? And said, well, the camera's amazing, but I said, I do find it annoying that the camera lets me know that the white clouds are a little bit overexposed. I mean, anybody who's going to spend $8,000 on a simple Leica, or more money on the equipment, 20,000, next thing you're up at $20,000, $25,000. If you're that interested in photography, you should be able to look at the clouds and say, I guess they're going to be overexposed. I don't need the camera to tell me that they're damn well overexposed. So I sometimes, when I'm working with automatic cameras, I tend to select a shutter speed and an aperture that I know that works well for the situation I'm in. And therefore, I let the camera select the ISO. So I'm working mainly like that. But of course, I'm on top of that the whole time, because I'm aware of that. I know the situation, of things like noise, basically noise, or grain structure and stuff like that. I never had a problem with grain, and I never had a problem with super sharpness, an 8x10, an 8x10 camera, or a 150 megapixel phase one camera. I never had a problem if something was very grainy. I even used for a while a half frame camera years ago, that was very grainy with Tri-X film, So I enjoyed making images that sometimes were super grainy and other ones that were super sharp. So I was aware of technique. It's not like I'm just putting technique on. I'm not saying it's not important, but I think you should become a skilled driver of a car and not get into accidents or kill people with your car or kill yourself. And that's a given. But then where are you going with the car? That's how is the work? I mean, I years ago, I had a very, very good assistant who was with me for 3.5, nearly 4 years, and he was fabulous assistant. He was very good with the equipment and very valuable to me, indispensable. And he was going to take, he said 6 months off, he'd saved up, and he took 6 months off to prepare his portfolio. And I always remember giving him the time. I said, I giving him an hour to look over his work. And I was shocked how bad the work was, and I had really wanted him to succeed. I really wanted him to do well and to be a good working photographer, and I was shocked and I was disappointed because I thought he worked with me on a lot of massive jobs, like dozens and dozens of Vogue covers, dozens of Rolling Stone covers, dozens of everything, still life projects, Lavazza calendars, Pirelli calendars, and so on, stuff like that. So I was kind of like very sad for him and I tried to help him in a positive way to make the things better of what he had done,
So that brings up an interesting.
In other words, he was a technical guy. That is a problem.
That's what I mean. And, it brings up such an interesting question of, do you really think that true creative, cutting edge, like really impactful photos that translate or communicate style, energy, can you really teach that? Or is that an innate thing, do you feel like?
I think there's an unfortunate answer to that. There's another good analogy coming here. I've worked with a lot of actors over the years. I mean, really hundreds, because I directed more than 500 TV commercials. So I worked even with actors there who were quite good, actually. You always think somebody in a TV commercial, no, but I worked with some actors that were really good. And also I photographed a lot of serious actors. I'm of the opinion that you cannot be taught to be an actor. I think you need something inside you to start with, to be a good actor. Yes. You just can say something naturally. That's what it is. An actor has to become different characters. Now, I believe that to get on the scale of 1 to 10 as an actor, to get even a 1 or a 2 out of 10, you got to have something inside to do it. You got to have, there's got to be something inside you that enables you to communicate something. And some people just have a natural way of doing things and understanding what a director is looking for. And it's just natural, like a Jack Nicholson. He just had a natural way of just instantly just being able to communicate a feeling. Like he could be totally kind of like a super mad guy, funny guy in Cuckoo's Nest, or he could be much heavier, like a private eye in Chinatown. I mean, but with him, he had you need that charisma inside, I think, to get on that scale at all. And I think there are people that never get on the scale of 1 to 10. In other words, you're saying what is 1 to 10 is 1 out of 10 bad. No, but in my opinion, you're on the scale so you can act. And then, of course, as people get, there are people who go to acting class who are maybe a 2 out of 10. With acting class, they can go from 2 to 5, that can learn it. But to get on the scale, it's a DNA thing. You need something inside. And I think that with really good photographers that I've met, and I've met a lot of photographers, there's something in them that there's a driving force there to create and do something with photography. They love photography. They want to create imagery. And I mean, I had long conversations with really good photographers. Richard Avedon, I once had a long conversation with him, and he rented my studio in LA when I was still in LA. And the photographer Hiro was a brilliant photographer and fantastically helpful to me. So I think there has to be something inside. So that's a problem. Going back to equipment, people love cameras. You know, they put it in their hand. Oh, I love this. Like you go into a new car and you take a deep breath, and it's the new car smell. You know, they take it out the box and so on, and it's funny. There was a new Leica came into the studio, and it was sitting there. And of course, I had assistants here that were desperate to unpack the new Leica. You know, and I was like, they said, "Do you want me to unpack it?" I said, "No, I'll do it later. It's all right." And they said, "But don't you want to look at
But
it?
why? Yeah.
Don't you want to hold the lens or look, you know, or look through the viewfinder and so on?" You know, so I was never. I mean, I was certainly when I started, I was more curious about the equipment rather than it as an object, something tactile. You know, I was more curious to see what it could do. You know, so I think it's a little bit of the equipment's a little bit of a trap for some photographers, because I met a lot of photographers, and sometimes I've done a master class with some photographers, and of course I think that maybe in the end a little bit disappointed because they want to sit around and talk about the difference between f2.8 lens and an f4 lens. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, they're happy to. What do you think of that program? And I'll tell you, digital cameras were a match made in heaven for those guys.
Absolutely.
You know,
I totally agree with that.
it tells me the clouds are overexposed. Cool. You know?
It's so funny because it is kind of an unfortunate reality. I would say that I feel the same way. There is something in the DNA for sure. And I think that, like, you know, when you are, it doesn't mean that you can't make money as a photographer if you don't have something in your DNA that's really
no, you can have a very good career. I mean, you can have a very good career doing solid technical photography.
Exactly.
Problem.
Exactly.
But there has to be a point. I mean, if you're going to fashion business is 85% women that you photograph. That's a fashion business. You know, it's approximately 20 to 1 the amount of money that for every $20 a woman spends, a man spends $1. You know, and apparently it can be more than that country to country. You know, it can be more than that. And you include in that jewelry and things like that, cosmetics. You know, jewelry is a fashion business, cosmetics is a fashion business, clothing is a fashion business, different outfits and so on, couture, evening dress, day-to-day, pret-a-porter, haute couture, all of these things. And unless you like photographing women, and you notice I said that you like photographing women, like you got to like women. That's true. You have to like women, but you have to enjoy photographing women. You know how to communicate. That's why I told you that bit about coming out as a director. You know, one of the things in directing, do you handle male actors differently from female actors, or you handle them the same? You know, most of the time you say, you know, most women actresses would say, I want to be just treated, I don't want any difference in the way you handle me, you know. But I think there is a subtle way that you do, not in any way chauvinistic, because if you handle some heavy actresses in a chauvinistic way, you're going to be in trouble immediately. So I think that there has to be a love of humanity if you're a people photographer. And of course, the only apart from people, you have landscape, you know, and you have still life, and then you have, you know, all the different genres. You have wedding photographers, you have car photographers, you know, and so on. But handling people, that was one of the main things that I learned at film school, that they began to open my eyes about that. And also, I was somebody, as you can tell even from this interview, I was somebody that enjoyed speaking with people. So, I mean, I remember Joaquin Phoenix coming to the studio and he was totally nervous about being photographed. And I was like, how can somebody that's like in front of 200 crew members and he has to do a performance? And of course, the obvious thing, we went upstairs and had a coffee. He was so nervous. I mean, I said, we got to sit down for a minute, you know? And he said, yes, but when I'm in front of a camera, I'm not Joaquin Phoenix. I'm playing a character. So he said, I become somebody else. You know, there's a famous British actor that I read his book called Alec Guinness, who was a fabulous actor, amazing, incredible career, outrageous. And he was just beyond incredible good actor. And he was painfully shy, but he didn't have a problem going out on a stage in front of 3,000 people because he wasn't Alec Guinness. You know, he just put a cloak on and he was John Smith. So therefore, if he forgot a line, it was John Smith forgetting a line, not, you know, Alec Guinness. So I think you have to learn to deal with people that might be like that are painfully worried about being photographed, you know. So that's in another part of your DNA. It's not just whether you love photography, but your ability to handle people in situations and also to handle bad situations, you know.
That is, I talk about this all the time, especially in my line of work in weddings. I cannot overemphasize how important the natural ability to connect with people while you're photographing them is. It is truly an art form in itself.
And you have 45 seconds.
Oh, you're only 45 seconds, so you're going to drop off?
No, I'm saying, no.
Oh.
I'm saying when you're doing a wedding picture.
Oh, yes.
They expect you to be fast.
Yes, exactly. That's the thing.
The only time that you can be possibly in wedding photography a little bit slower if you're photographing the bride and the bridegroom.
100%.
Hey, listen, I did it. I'll tell you a challenge that I did if you're curious about that. I did a royal wedding in Buckingham Palace, right? This is what it was. They arrived in the throne room to be photographed. Okay. Exactly, pretty much on time, which was 12:30. All right. 61 people came into the room at 12:30. All right. All talking to each other, all very excited about being at the wedding. All right. I had 11 situations that went from 61 people all the way down to a single shot of the bride. Right? Now, 61 people, and you're handling the queen mother, you're handling princesses, and also, which made it the most difficult, you're handling 8 children. Wow. Running around. 12:30, and they said, we'd like you to be finished, Mr. Watson, by 1 o'clock. I remember it like it was yesterday. So wow. You go for 61 people, and the problem is you might have done your research and know the names, but you can't back then call the excuse me, Queen Elizabeth. You know, you are the Duke of Edinburgh. You always address them as sir or ma'am, you know. But the problem is when you're addressing them and somebody's talking all the time, you can't say sir because you're addressing approximately 30 men. So how do you know, get attention? And the way I used it, I had a car horn on my camera that you squeezed and it made a loud, funny noise like a duck almost. Car horn. And I said to them, when I hit this horn, I'm ready to take a picture. Make sure you see the camera. If you don't see the camera, you're not in the picture. That was the instruction. I mean, that was a kind of like, you had to give an instruction like that. And you had to, and in fact, Prince Charles, as he was at that time, kept talking to his father, the Duke of Edinburgh, next to her. And eventually, after a while, I said, Prince Charles, could you just look this way, please? Like that. And he was quite shocked that I said Prince Charles, because normally you say, sir, could you please? So eventually I finished at exactly 1:09. So I did 11 situations, starting with 61 all the way down to one person. And that was done in approximately 38 minutes. From
Absolutely incredible.
You know, and that's why I decided never to be a wedding photographer.
And I don't blame you. Yeah, it's such a difficult form of photography, and you really do have to have a love of humanity, and you have to have a natural interest in people, and you have to have a sixth sense for their vibe and the way that your presence is affecting the people in front of you. Because, you know, especially, you know, I mean, even in your situation, Joaquin Phoenix, I mean, he's a megastar. You would think that he would be so comfortable in any type of situation where he's getting recorded or photographed. But, you know, I mean, it's up to you, really. I heard Annie Leibovitz say, and it was just a clip, a soundbite of her, so I didn't hear the rest of the interview, but she said something to the effect of, I'm not responsible for the mood of my client. And I have total respect for her, but I really never thought like that. When I have a camera in my hand and I'm photographing somebody, I always felt like I was in a bit of a performance in order to extract the maximum amount of comfort and openness from the person I'm photographing.
Yeah, but I mean, Annie's pretty tough. When she has a vision for something, she's pretty definite. I actually saw her right outside my studio window in the West Village. And she was having an argument in the street. They closed off the street because right across from my studio was another studio, and she was in the front of it. And she was arguing with Al Gore. And he was like doing this business, like, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. And she was like this, you have to do this. So I think part of Annie's success, she's a tremendous photographer. Part of her success is definitely that she's also on a mission to get a photograph. I mean, that's another question of things. You have to, if you're on a mission to get something, and sometimes in the situation, sometimes if I find the mountain is too, I don't feel like climbing the mountain to get there, I sometimes release a little bit. Like, you know, I don't give up easily. You know, that expression, the dog with a bone. I don't think I don't think I would ever get into an argument like that with Al Gore, but I mean, I've been pretty strong about, I think I've been so organized ahead of time with what I want to do. I mean, if ever I'm doing photographing, you know, I was in Rome photographing actresses there, and I wanted to do nudes on several actresses. I make that clear by phone long before they get to the studio. An actress doesn't walk in the studio and say, "Excuse me, take off your clothes." Yeah. You know, at that point, all of that is, for me, I want to be prepared, and I want to be prepared creatively. I want to be prepared. You know, I've said many times, that's one of the weaknesses, because preparation is the thing. And photographers always think when you say preparation, they're always thinking that, well, are your batteries charged? Do I have my 2 lenses? Do I have the 2 camera bodies? Do I have this, that, and the next thing? It's got nothing to do with that. Nothing. That preparation shouldn't be discussed.
That should be par for the course.
And, you know, and the photographers say, "Oh, you're saying it's not important." No, of course it's important, but it's just a given. Yeah. You know, if you set out in a 400-mile journey in a remote part of the country, did you remember to put gas in the car? You know, is there gas in the car to do? And you go, well, of course I do that, you know. But that kind of preparation, you just, yes, I have gas in the car, you know. So are your cameras in good shape? Yes. But the preparation should be 98% creative. The preparation of equipment should be a given if you're a professional photographer. It should be given. Now, the preparation, if you're professional, is creative.
100%. Do you spend, I love that you brought it into that. Do you spend a good amount of time in active imagination, thinking of images that you want to create?
So I spend the vast amount of my time doing that, the vast amount. I spend my life with art books, art museums all over the planet.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the project I'm working on right now, is a good illustration of something. The project I'm working on right now is on Rome in Italy, and a big museum there gave me a contract to photograph in Rome, right? And they were going to do a big book on it. And the museum is basically like the Met in New York. It looks exactly like that. It looks like almost identical to the Met in New York. And the space is huge. And right away, you say, is this a book on Rome? Or as I changed it, it's a book of me in Rome. And the difference is this: if you do a book on Paris, people will say, oh, what are you going to do with the Eiffel Tower? You know, if you're doing a book on London, you're going to photograph Big Ben. New York, what about the Empire State Building? So therefore, begin to put down all Central Park, Fifth Avenue, et cetera, the West Village, Tribeca, the Wall Street, and so on. So you begin to that's what you're photographing, right? So in meetings with them, I said, look, there's a famous book on Rome by William Klein called Rome. And he should never call the book Rome, because you think, oh, it's the William Klein book on Rome. But the interesting thing is what he did, and it's a fabulous book, he only photographed the people of Rome. Right? So when you go there is no Colosseum in his book. And you say, oh my God, you did a book on Rome, but there's no Colosseum. There's no Mussolini buildings. There's no this, that, and the next thing. No, he just photographed the people of Rome. So in a weird way, you say, what are you doing the book on? And you say, I'm doing a book on Rome. You say, nah, no, it's not really a book on Rome. It's a book about the people of Rome. So you're the people of Rome. You could have called the book The People of Rome. Not that it has to be that literal. And in a way, it doesn't matter. So I'm picking at that. But creatively going into a project like that, what are you doing? You know, what are you doing there? What research are you doing, you know, for that? And can you just go to Rome and photograph somebody walking down the street? And part of the problem now, as opposed to, and this is quite interesting, with William Klein did the book on Rome in 1958. And the interesting thing about then, everybody in 1958 in Rome, guess how they dressed? They dressed like Italians. They're all Italian looking in Italian clothes. You go to Rome now, it's full of Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, Nike sneakers, Yankees hats, Mets hats, the Indians hats. I mean, everything. So you photograph a whole bunch of young people coming towards you. It looks like Times Square here or LA. So everything. So clothing has ceased to be a global identity. So if you were in the 1930s in Italy photographing people, you could tell the difference between pictures in London and also in Rome. They would be different. They dress differently, right? Now people don't. You walk down the Champs-Élysées, take pictures of people, they could be right in New York City. So that was one of the first things that was a problem in the project. How do you give it a Rome identity or an Italian identity when, yeah, they still looked, a lot of them, like Italians, but they're in a Calvin Klein t-shirt, you know, or cargo pants from the Gap, you know. So yeah, I'm just giving this as an example of creative preparation and research. And so there's just, and this is not a particularly good example, but I mean, when I was beginning to research, I found out that there was a place in Rome called Cinecittà. And Cinecittà Studios in Rome are where Fellini did all these movies. But they also had a Disneyland called Cinecittà World. there's like a small miniature Disneyland of things going on. But in there, they have things like gladiator fights and fake gladiator fights and stuff like that. Like they do in Western towns in Arizona, they do a fake shootout, you know? And I kind of researched, and then I found out that in Chinichiro World, they had something called Roman World. And then I found this woman who did a show with birds of prey. So she had owls, ravens, falcons, eagles, vultures, you know, all these different kinds of peregrine falcons. And she had kind of a simple gladiator outfit on. And then she did all of this performing with these birds. And then, you know, I spent a day with her. So there is, you know, theoretically, that woman could have been in Arizona and so on. So you're not looking for an identity, but she was a Roman woman working with birds in Rome. And therefore, for me, it was fabulous to do portraits of her with the birds themselves I photographed, and so on. So that gave me a segment there that I could just hang lots of other things on, you know, actors there. I went to the one a drama school and one a ballet school. So I photographed young actors and young ballet stars, you know, up and coming. So that bit by bit, I built a project that was me in Rome, not a book on Rome. So I photographed, I had very good access to everything. So I eventually got quite some good images of some of the monuments in Rome that I was happy with, that I thought was okay, that I thought were acceptable, especially when you put them next to a gladiator woman with a bird, that it made sense of a Colosseum if I put them next to each other. So that to me was, you know, that was my way of tackling problem about a book on Rome, because then I said, don't do a book on Rome, do a book of you in Rome. So therefore,
that makes complete.
I don't, you know, somebody could say, you know, I photographed, there was some sidewalk there. And I thought it was so beautiful, the sidewalk in Rome. And then there was a person there who was very knowledgeable about Rome, and it was fantastic. And they said, you know, they found out that this sidewalk they took in the beginning of the 18th century. They put the sidewalk down here, and the stones they took from the Colosseum. So they actually took stone from the Colosseum and used that. So I photographed some of the sidewalks there, and it's stone from the Colosseum. So that made it interesting. Whereas if you look at the picture quickly, it could be a sidewalk anywhere on the planet that had stone in it, you know. But it wasn't. I mean, I can almost give you the address, and you can go and look at the stone, you know, where the stone was. So the fact that I'm photographing things like that, I photographed, you know, on a small side street in the middle of a poor area, there was a baker there, a woman who ran a bakery shop, and she did the most incredible cakes, you know, mountain cake for weddings, but also other things, Christmas and so on. Beautiful, very highly decorated cakes. I photographed the cakes, you know. So nothing was, you know, birds, cakes, actors, famous actors, directors that were there. In the studios themselves, I photographed, if you remember the HBO series Rome, you know, I photographed the sets are still there and they're falling down a little bit, but I photographed the sets there. So therefore I photographed sets of Rome, you know. So the project came together very well. I used two camera systems, Leica and Phase One. So I worked at two ends of the scale, handheld and much more heavyweight. You know, some of the nudes were done with multiple layers, you know, where you could take a 150 megapixel camera and squeeze two frames out of it. So you're working at about 280 megapixels.
Wow.
So you would be working in very high definition. Other times I was working on 6400 ISO, and the picture was, of course, totally rough and raw looking, you know, which I loved. So I worked at both ends of the scale.
That's so interesting.
The project has everything. It has dimension from grain structure to the dimension of creativity, what's in the project, you know.
Would you say I mean, it's just amazing information there, Albert. Would you say when you're creatively preparing for a new project and you're, creatively thinking about what you want to portray, the direction that you want to take it, how the final product, how close is that to your original vision
Um,
usually?
well, you do the research, and you don't arrive in Rome and say to somebody, "Oh, what's that building?" And the person says to you, "Well, that's a Colosseum." You already know the Colosseum. You already you know the streets. You know the map. You use Google Map to find streets and stuff like that. So therefore, I spent 3 months preparing for the project, doing research, and some photographers say to me, "I like to be spontaneous and I like to go out and find things and so on." Yeah, and I'm saying, guess what? I like to find things too, and some things surprise me. But I want to go in there with a hell of a lot of knowledge first. Not, and I would even say to that person, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm not like you. I'm not Mozart. Mozart could make things up, and he hadn't, because he had Mozart parents. Guess what they did? They were both musicians. What was his sister? His older sister was a musician. So he was born into that. The DNA was musicianship. His father was a strict disciplinarian, taught Mozart, but he was also in the DNA was Mozart. So a combination of all that hammering and discipline was that he could play violin when he was 4 years old. He wrote a small opera when he was 7.5, 8 years old. You know what I mean? So that people like that are few and far between. So unless you're of that ilk, you say, "Well, I'm going to go to Athens and see what I can find because I heard it's a cool place." There's nothing wrong with spending 2 or 3 months doing research in the evenings, working on books, getting an idea of what you're going to put together. For this, the show has 200 prints in it. Every print is 5 feet high, and the horizontals are 5 feet by 6, 7 feet. And in fact, one's 5 by 10, right? There are 4 prints in the show that are 10 feet high, UV prints. And so putting them, you're putting this together as a concept. But the concept for it was more that you go in and you're faced with 200 5-foot prints. Every print is exactly the same height. So it's more like you're looking at an Instagram on a phone where every picture is the same. Every picture is a 4 by 5 proportion on Instagram. I mean, you can squeeze a horizontal out of it, but essentially Instagram pictures are labeled they're kind of 4 by 5 size, So I like the idea of that every print was the same size. And all of it is printed on cotton. The whole show is on cotton and pinned on the wall. So there is no frame, no glass on it. There's no glass on the pictures. So therefore, I've never done that before. So that's part of the concept. That's part of the concept. The image that's behind me, if you see the image behind, you see here. So if you look at that, I don't know if this works.
Oh yeah, I can see it. It's gorgeous.
So therefore, this is printed on linen. So if I don't know if it's focusing there, but I mean, this print is 5 feet by 7 feet there. So this is one of the pictures. It's made from 200 and about 60 megapixels. The picture above, let's see if I can get that there. This is a Leica picture. This is also it's actually slightly bigger. This is a handheld night shot by a Leica.
Incredible.
Between studio there, and it's a nude, which you can see on the side, it's nude, So the idea of the show is there's everything from still lifes to restaurants to monuments to gates that are falling to pieces that are 2,000 years old, stone gates of Rome and so on. So, I mean, there are monks in monasteries, there are cardinals in the Vatican, So it's a very broad look and just whatever I found in the time, that's what I shot.
Absolutely love it. I love how it's just so organic. You can spend months and you can spend all this time, coming up with your framework for what you want to produce. And yes, it's going to stick along that lane, but eventually, it's an organic process all throughout. And your final product, may deviate a little bit, but it starts with that discipline of preparation and really create a vision on it.
Preparation. I had gone when I did the Las Vegas project, which was a few years ago. I remember driving back from just outside Las Vegas, about 4 miles. I went to photograph a derelict place, a diner that was derelict. And I remember coming back, and it was still sunny. The sun was going a little bit, probably 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and coming back, and I saw a billboard there, and it was just after, it must have been just after 9/11, and the billboard, which normally would have advertising in it, had "God Bless America" with flags blowing. It was a video billboard, and it had God with the flag, and then the word "God bless," and then the third one, and the flag's moving. It's a video, and it was massive, and it was right in the middle of the desert. Nothing else, just a billboard in the middle of the desert, and they were saying "God Bless America." And, I hadn't planned that. I didn't know that existed. And I mean, right away, I said, okay, I marked where it was. I just checked where the sun was going to be. And I said, right, let's be back here at about 6:30, and we'll set up an 8x10 camera, and I'll shoot it with the sunset, "God Bless America," on an electronic billboard. So did I know that billboard was there with "God Bless America"? No, but I saw it. So in other words, just because I'm saying be prepared, it's not always that you be prepared where you go to an address and take it. It can be that when you're on your way there, you should be switched on the whole time. You should be looking for stuff like that. So I'm just saying that wasn't planned. Because that's a photographer said to me, "Oh, I'm more spontaneous. I like to feel spontaneous." Nothing wrong with that. I mean, I can be spontaneous too. I'm pretty good at it, finding things pretty quickly. I can see things very quickly now because I've been doing it for so long,
Yeah, it's become instinctual now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's back. Sorry to go back to the boring analogy of a car. You get in the car and you drive it, Now that doesn't say that you don't have to watch out for other cars, pedestrians, kids walking in front of you and stuff like that, running in front of you. So that doesn't mean to say you don't watch for that, but the method, the approach is one of being natural with the equipment. The equipment is a car. The equipment can be a camera. Being natural with it. You should be able to feel comfortable with it and get rid of any technical stuff, but be aware of it at the same time,
Yeah, it does become an extra sense.
I'm almost out of time. I'm sorry. I'm almost out of time.
Oh, yes, I know. I was going to put a hard stop on it. I realized we're right up against it. I just wanted to ask one more question to close this out. What is, and I can't wait to ask this, what is the shot that you've taken that you're actually the most proud of in your career?
I would probably say not the best photograph I've taken, because I've taken some that I think that are probably, it's always difficult to look at your own work and answer that question, because but I think I'd never photographed anybody famous, and I got a call from Harper's Bazaar to photograph Alfred Hitchcock, the Alfred Hitchcock shot. And I had never photographed, and the fact that I was just out of film school, and somebody said, "Can you photograph Alfred Hitchcock?" I mean, I almost had a nervous breakdown. So it was really a challenge to not be nervous, or I was at the beginning of my career, to screw it up, or how do I do it? And I approached it the right way. I was lucky. I did the right thing, because they asked me to photograph. He was giving a recipe for how to cook a goose to the magazine, because he was a gourmet chef. Very few people knew that he was a very good cook, and he loved cooking. And he was giving this recipe on how to cook a goose to Harper's Bazaar, and they wanted to illustrate it. So they wanted him to have a plate with a goose on it. And then I thought about it for a while, and I called them back, and I said, I was just thinking, isn't it better that he's got the goose by the neck, Alfred Hitchcock, and it looks like he, of course, did it himself. And I thought they weren't going to like it and stuff like that. And they called back and said, we love it. So I did that shot with him with the goose, and I put Christmas decorations around the goose's neck because it was for Christmas. So they didn't ask for the Christmas decorations. I put them there, with a ribbon and Christmas balls there, on the goose's neck. So it was for Christmas. So that was part of being trained as a graphic designer, concept, putting it together and so on. And therefore that shot, I was that when I finally got it, and I got the film back the next day, and there was an image on the film, I was so happy, and I was so happy that I got the shot. And when I sent it in, they loved the shot. And then the next thing was I got commissions from all over the place. So I was prepared.
Yeah, that is just that shot. I was speechless the first time I saw that. Everything about that shot works. The hand, how he's pointing to it, where he's holding the goose by the neck, the expression on his face, everything just works so perfectly, Mr. Watson.
The funny thing about that was, and the shot ran in color, so it was actually very nice in color. But the thing that was kind of nice about it, he was fabulous. I have to be honest and say he was giving it, there you go, there it is in color,
Wow.
And you can see and other times he was pretending to cry because he regretted killing it and stuff like that. So there was he helped me a lot, because I think he knew I was a little bit nervous, but he just made it very interesting, and he acted it out. And then after I shot him, he said, you look like you could do with a nice cup of tea, because he's very English. And I said, well, that would be nice. And I went into his office and sat and had tea with him. So I mean, it was good. So I think it's a straightforward picture with two things. They wanted it on the goose on a plate, so you wouldn't have seen that. But him with it by the neck was that was preparation, or thinking about it. And I just took the chance, and I thought, well, I'm happy to get the damn job, but I knew it was I could have screwed it up, I mean, because no way you're with whatever it is, a 18-pound plate weight, I knew there would be problems there, that he'd have to sit at a table or something. I mean, I saw a problem, but I thought he'd be able to hold it for a while, because it was quite heavy. And I spoke to him about that. They wanted with the plate. I said I thought it was nice he had him by the neck. He said, oh, that's good. He liked that, So I just say that it's actually a good example of preparation,
For sure. You took a risk, but as we all know, fortune tends to favor the bold.
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, and that's why when you say what's your favorite show, I think that gave me confidence, and and I thought, wow, I was able to do it. So I thought next time I'll do better. That was the idea.
Well, Mr. Watson, I just want to thank you so much for, spending your time here. Your time is extremely valuable. And me and everybody that's going to be watching this has learned just a ton just by this conversation. So I know you're a very busy man, but I would love to hopefully have you on again in the future so we can talk about some other things. And yeah, I just really appreciate the time.
You should stay in touch with Aaron and see if you can get a hold of the book, the Rome book.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. And also too,
called the book, we called the book a Rome Codex, the word codex, because codex is not even an Italian word. It's actually, it's a Latin word, codex. And codex is a 2,000-year-old word meaning a statement. It can be a statement of affairs. It can be a statement of law. It can be lots of things, but it can be dominantly a statement about something. So a Rome Codex meant it was, for me, a statement on Rome. And then it's not a book on Rome, it's a statement of what I found in Rome. That was, so a Rome Codex was the right title for the book.
Absolutely. Can't wait to check it out. I will definitely stay in touch with your team. And again, thank you so much. We very much
Okay.
appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank the cameraman too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.